Hi, hello, and welcome to this video where we're going to be putting to the test the new Hourglass Evil Eye palette. So this is one of the three new holiday palettes, like face palettes from Hourglass. These have been very popular in the past couple of years and I've always resisted the urge to get one, and I will briefly mention why. And I also purchased one of the pop shots from Charlotte Tilbury. This is in the shade Cosmic Rocks. So you will see both of these put to the test in a little bit in little demo videos. I'm also going to have comparison swatches for the Hourglass palette, just, you know, with bronzers, highlighters and blushes in my collection that might be similar in tone, but they're probably not going to be similar in texture because I don't really have that many like baked formulas. So something to be said about the Hourglass face powders is that they're baked, which makes them such an incredibly flattering formula, like finish on the face. I have had ambient lighting powders in the past. I still have one in the shade Dim Light. I do have their diffused bronze light bronzer, excuse me, in my collection already for several years, and I absolutely love it because the finish of these powders on the skin is so natural, so you know, it blurs your skin so beautifully. Lovely finish on the skin, which is why I've always wanted to have more of these powders and I've wanted to try these palettes. But they are so all over the place when it comes to the amount of each of the finishes that you're getting per palette, and you're always in the danger, I feel like, of getting powders in here that you're never going to use, either because they don't suit your skin tone or because some of them end up being like way too similar to each other. Because of these considerations, I've never purchased an Hourglass palette before, and you know, but I've been very curious, so I really wanted to try one for myself. So the shade that I purchased is, like I said, Evil Eye. This is the outer packaging. The outer packaging of this palette is much more stunning, much heftier, much more luxurious feeling in the hand. The reason that I chose Evil Eye out of all the offerings this year is because it contained exactly the right ratio for me of the different types of like finishes and products. I don't need an ambient lighting powder, so one ambient lighting powder was more than enough for me, and I thought this ambient lighting powder might come in handy as a mixer for some of these other shades to lighten them up or change the tone or whatever. I loved the tone of the bronzer because, as you can see, this is not a very warm leaning bronzer. It actually looks quite neutral leaning. I love that there is a strobe light, so there's also a highlighter powder, and there are three blushes that come in a different, you know, color and tone. I love this like neutrally peachy color here. There's a beautiful coral, and then you have this more like pinky berry blush. So I found this palette to offer the right amount of variety and the least risk for me when choosing this, and being able to use all the 6 powders in here. So that's really the reason I chose Evil Eye out of all the palettes that I've ever seen from the brand, because it just contained the right amount of ratio of the different types of products and different enough colors for me to feel pretty safe that none of these powders is going to go to waste. But I feel like really the most interesting part is putting these powders to the test, so I'm going to leave you with the demos, the comparison swatches and my final thoughts. Okay, let's do some comparison swatches. We even have the privilege of beautiful daylight today, no artificial lighting, so this is just, you know, pure unadulterated daylight. I'm just going to try to compare similar things in my collection just to also see for my own curiosity, is there something really similar in my collection or did I buy something that is ultimately quite unique? So let's start with the bronzer. The first thing that I want to compare to in terms of a bronzer shade is, of course, to my only other existing Hourglass, you know, face powder besides an ambient lighting, and that is the shade Diffused Bronze Light. I have a mini of this already for a while, because especially if for whatever reason you didn't find the bronzer in the Evil Eye palette cool enough for you, maybe it is worth looking into Diffused Bronze Light. I just wanted to show you, even like this, you can see this is so much cooler. It almost looks gray compared to this powder. So let's swatch the bronzer from the Evil Eye palette right here, close to my wrist, and then we're going to put Diffused Bronze Light next to it. And I can't tell you how frustrating it is to be swatching diffused bronze light, because I feel like it never really comes across on a swatch the way it translates on my face. This is the most beautiful, neutral, slightly leaning, cool bronzer that I have in my collection. You can see by comparison that the bronzer from the Evil Eye palette is a lot deeper, and it definitely does not have as cool of an undertone as the one from diffused bronze light. That said, I think this is still a really neutral leaning bronzer. Now, because we're talking about a very neutral leaning bronzer, I wanted to compare to one of my other favorite neutral leaning bronzers, which is this one from Victoria Beckham Beauty. So this is the duo, so the bronzing brick in the shade 2, and I'm going to swatch the two powders individually, and I'm also going to do a little swirl of both of them together, because that's actually how I personally use this powder. And we're going to compare shade-wise. In terms of texture, these are very different from each other. The two from Hourglass are a baked formula, not to be confused with baked gelée. I'm going to mention baked gelée in a bit, but these are baked. The one from Victoria Beckham is a pressed powder. So here is the lightest shade from the Victoria Beckham bronzer, again barely showing up. Here is the somewhat deeper shade from the Victoria Beckham bronzer, and here is the two mixed together, which is how I usually use this powder. Again, you can see they're very light in tone, but they're also very buildable and very neutral. I think even compared to the bronzing brick from Victoria Beckham, you can see how much more, you know, neutral to cool diffused bronze light is. It is just such a stunning shade of bronzer. Now let's compare to two baked gelée powders that I have in my collection. So these are both quite old. I think this is the Extra Dimension formula from MAC, which is a gorgeous baked gelée. So again, not to be confused, this one is baked gelée. The one from Nabla over here, also a beautiful bronzer. This is the skin bronzing in the shade Dune. Also baked gelée. So these are all baked, but the difference is these are baked and these are baked gelée. And I have a video where I talk about baked gelée eyeshadows, where I also touch upon briefly on the difference in the formula, or what I perceive to be the difference in the formula between a baked and a baked gelée. But essentially, I think what it comes down to is you have, you know, this like liquid creamy texture, which in the case of the baked gelée has a slightly more like gel texture to it. They're processed in a similar way. They're both baked into an industrial oven, but the effect that you may get from these two, you know, finishes is slightly different. Purely baked products tend to have a very lightweight, like veil-like feeling, so they are powders which apply like soft creams. Baked gelée products have a somewhat similar, you know, behavior on the skin, but they have a bit more body to them. They're drier and they don't feel as veil-like. They just feel quite, you know, almost like hard to the touch and dry. Nabla is one that I consider to be relatively neutral in tone, and the one from MAC is definitely very warm. So I think it's very interesting now to put a truly warm bronzer to compare to the one from Hourglass. Let me put the Nabla Dune over here. And then we have Delphic from MAC on this side. And I think now you can truly see how much more neutral in tone the bronzer, the Evil Eye bronzer is, compared to something much warmer in tone like Delphic from MAC. Even the one from Nabla is coming across a little bit warmer compared to this. I think this is still a little bit more neutral. Okay, when it comes to blush, we have a few extra comparisons to make here. So let's get started with what is, texturally speaking, essentially the same as the Hourglass palette. The only other, you know, product in my collection that I have that is truly in the same formula are these baked powder blushes that were released for the Bridgerton 2 collection from Pat McGrath Labs. These are truly the only ones that are 100%, you know, comparable to each other. And I think there are actually some similar shades in here, so let's get to some swatching, shall we? The Bridgerton palette also has a beautiful berry tone to it, so I want to compare it to the berry blush here from the Hourglass palette. I'm also going to swatch the pink blush. I don't think that's going to be similar, but, you know, just for shits and giggles we can do it. Let's start off actually with the blush from Hourglass, then put the powder. Oh, you can see how much darker the powder from Pat is. And let's also swatch the pink blush from Pat. Hourglass, the blush from Pat McGrath Labs from the Bridgerton 2 palette, the berry one, and here is the pink. This looks a bit like a rose gold actually, if I look at it compared to these other two blushes. The other two blushes are in fact much cooler leaning compared to this one. There is a warmth in here. Now something that I think I spoke about in the demo video is that some of these Hourglass powders have shimmer in them, some of them are more matte. But what I forgot to stress is that matte isn't really, you should not understand matte in the same way that you would understand, you know, a truly matte powder press formula, because a baked formula never really behaves like a true matte. There is always like a satin quality to it, like a luminosity that just comes from the way the product is processed. So even though, for example, these two are something I would consider a matte finish because they don't have any visible shimmer to them or anything, they still don't apply as like a purely matte formula. So that's something very important that I forgot to mention before about the Hourglass powders. But you can see the Hourglass powder has a little bit of this like rose gold tone to it because there's gold shimmer in here. I wanted to pull out now my Charlotte Tilbury Beautifying Face Palette in the shade Pillow Talk. So this is another formula that is baked gelée. This is an absolutely stunning palette. I love it so much. I travel with it all the time. The only thing I'm really missing in here is a bronzer. If I could substitute, I think, one of like these two blushes with a bronzer, that would have been basically the perfect face palette. But as it is, it houses two matte blushes, one that's a bit more shimmery, and a highlighter. I absolutely love the highlighter. You can see what a dip it has into it. Anyway, we're talking about the blushes. Now there is a berry toned blush in here that I thought would be interesting to swatch up against the berry from the Hourglass palette. But again, you see, even from the tone, this is going to be much more similar to the berry from, oh, it's not even similar to the berry from Pat. This is much more red leaning. See, this is actually much more like a berry red, whereas this is purple toned. Maybe we can also swatch the rose gold that is in the Pillow Talk palette, because this is a true rose gold. So let's swatch that one right here. This is much more, you know, shimmery. This is truly like, I think it's meant to actually be a highlighter. I use it as a blush mixer or a blush topper. But the blush from Hourglass is actually looking a little bit, you know, of a cooler pink now compared to this one, which is much warmer in tone. Before we move on to the Vibrant Coral, I want to swatch Oasis Glow. Oasis Glow is the nude peachy bronzy shade, and I want to swatch that against one of my favorite blushes ever, which is Desert Orchid from Pat McGrath Labs. Let me see. Yes, this is Desert Orchid. You can see very similar, you know, idea, and also this is considered to be a shimmery finish. This is also not one of the demi-matte finishes from Pat. This also has a little bit of a pearl running through it, but a completely different formula. This is a pressed powder. So let's swatch Oasis Glow next to the blush from Pat, and I think they're actually quite similar. In terms of their tones, I feel like these two are incredibly similar to each other. I think on the skin, because the powder from Pat is a pressed powder, it is much more, it applies much more substantially on the cheeks, and the pearl is quite subtle, so this comes across as like a matte with a slight sheen to it. This one has legit sparkles in it, so unfortunately for some people this is going to accentuate texture. Alright, and now let's move on to swatching the Vibrant Coral shade from the Evil Eye palette to some corals that I have in my collection. I have to say, this is the type of coral that I don't have a lot of. As soon as I saw the tone of this blush, my actual like first, you know, thought was the Bijou Brilliance blush shade in the shade Coral Cosmos that was present in the Starstruck Splendor palette here. But you can also see, even by looking at them, this has a bit more of a pastel quality to it. Let's apply a bit more, and then going in with the Coral Cosmos shade from Pat McGrath Labs. The shade from Pat is actually a lot cooler and a lot more pastel. Oh yeah, let's go back to the Bridgerton 2 palette and swatch the actual coral shade here, because I'm super curious how similar that one is. I think this is going to be much more of a soft peach coral, but let's compare. Huh, okay. this is a little bit more pink. I think there's a bit more like an orangey red vein running through this, but obviously I think on the cheeks they're going to look super similar to each other. This one also seems to have a little bit of a golden shimmer to it, but other than that I think these two are also going to be blushes that look very similar on the skin, and they are essentially in the same formula. So there you have it. I already have something extremely similar to Vibrant Coral from Pat McGrath Labs. Now I wanted to bring out two of my favorite like coral leaning shades from Pat and from Gucci to compare to the one from Hourglass, just to illustrate how different the coral can look depending on the undertone. So first let's swatch this one from Pat. This is the shade Electric Bloom, which is one of my absolute favorite summer blushes ever. It is a very potent and vibrant shade, but oh my gosh, I love it so much. And you can see again that this shade, even though it is a coral, has a bit more of the red undertone running through it. It's like a watermelon. The shade from Pat is like a vibrant watermelon, whereas this is more of like a straight up coral. And another coral shade that I have in my collection that I also think is quite different from all the other ones that I have is this blush here from Gucci. This is in the shade Soft Red. This is one of my favorite blushes and blush shades of all freaking time, because this has this gorgeous chili pepper vein running through it, and I can never get enough of this blush. Let me put a bit more. Look what a stunning shade this is. You can see, even though it's quite similar to these other coral shades, it has like a uniqueness to the tone that doesn't quite compare to any of the other coral shades. But again, not really extremely similar to the Hourglass one, because the Hourglass one is, you know, more of like a pink based coral, whereas these are more like red leaning corals. And I think finally for the highlighter shade, I'm guessing that a lot of you will be quite similar how this shade here, this is the shade Rose Gold from Evil Eye, would compare to our favorite Divine Rose highlighter from Pat McGrath Labs. Just to specify, the one from Pat McGrath Labs is a baked gelée formula, so it's baked, but it's a baked gelée. So here is Rose Gold from the Hourglass palette. I think this is an absolutely stunning highlighter. It is such a pretty shade. And here is the one from Pat, and you will immediately notice the difference in the tones. I think the one in the Hourglass palette has a bit more of like a neutral champagne undertone, whereas here, and it's also, this one is a bit of a duochrome. If I shift in the light, and hopefully you can see it a little bit, this has a cool pink base, whereas this leans much more on like the champagne rose gold side, which is also why I took out my beloved highlighter from Lancome. Not a comparable formula, this is more of like a classic powder. Well, a classic powder in the sense that it's a pressed powder, even though it feels very creamy. But I think in terms of undertone, this might be quite similar to the shade from Hourglass. Ooh, look at that. This is much more of a true champagne, whereas this truly has a slight rose goldness to it, but it is a very subtle rose goldness. I absolutely love the tone of this highlighter. Okay, so I've already done the rest of my makeup, because I figured if we finish the makeup together, then you can see how everything looks together. Hopefully that's actually not distracting from the face powders. But I decided to go for that route, so it's too late now. I already have the rest of my makeup on, and we are going to actually reverse the order in which I was going to test things out. So obviously we're going to apply a little bit of the finishing powder, the bronzer and the highlighter. I was going to actually demo today the two pink blushes, because I am super intrigued whether my suspicions will be confirmed that they look the same on the cheeks, but we're going to leave that for tomorrow, because a couple of you made a very interesting comment on my Instagram where I posted about getting this palette, and you mentioned that specifically the shade Oasis Glow, which is this one here, is giving you issues and you're not able to make it work because it doesn't look that great on the skin. And I am intrigued, because this is in fact the blush shade that I'm the most excited about, because look at it, it is a beautiful like bronzy, peachy, nudie blush. It is exactly what I love in a blush. Color me intrigued. Let's put Oasis Glow to the test today. I'm going to grab my little kabuki here from Koyodo, and I'm going to take a little bit from the finishing powder here and just lightly dab that on the perimeter of my face. I'll be honest with you, I love these finishing powders, but like for my T-zone specifically, I like to apply something that is a little bit more pore filling and oil controlling, such as for example my Prada setting powder, because you know I have somewhat oilier skin, and especially in this area things tend to start to slide around, and this part of my face I feel like can look a little bit dry, so I actually love applying the finishing powders. Now you're not going to see much because it's a finishing powder. What I can tell you about these finishing powders from Hourglass, because I've had them in the past, I still have full size of dim light. Because of the baked nature of the product, they look so natural on the skin. They give you this like beautiful like glow from within, not really luminosity, it's just like a natural glow. But if you have very oily skin, I don't know that you're going to get along with these powders. I don't think they're really meant much for like actually setting, they're finishing powders. So I think you might have to go in with several different products, or if you're only going to rely on this one, be prepared that your foundation might start sliding around a little bit earlier than you're used to. I'm going to zoom in just a tiny bit, like this. And the first thing we're going to do is take the bronzer. I think one of the good things about this palette is that the bronzer, at the very least in the pan, and yesterday when I swatched it, looked like it was a fairly like neutral color, not too warm, not too orangey, and I can pull off an orangey bronzer no problem. I'm sorry, this brush is literally falling apart. I can pull off an warmer bronzer, but it's nicer in this like format to actually have a bronzer that is a bit more on the neutral side, just so you can go either way, because obviously this is something very useful for traveling. So if you want to travel, you don't want it to be like too confined by your bronzer shade. So I'm going to take this powder, and I already have a bronzer from Hourglass. I have the shade Diffused Bronze Light, and Diffused Bronze Light is the most beautiful cool toned bronzer. So I already know how these apply, they're just super beautiful on the skin. So this strikes me as a bronzer which leans on the neutral to maybe slightly red undertone side. At least on my skin, I feel like there is a little bit, I'm detecting a little bit of a coppery reddish undertone to it, but that's something I enjoy in a bronzer, so I'm so far quite enjoying this color. It's certainly very different from Diffused Bronze Light. I will probably be doing comparison swatches. Either you have already seen comparison swatches, or I will be doing comparison swatches in the end of this video, but this is a very different bronzer shade compared to Diffused Bronze Light. Diffused Bronze Light basically doesn't show up on a swatch. Like I have to put it on my face for you to actually be able to see it. Okay, I'm going to switch to my blush brush now, and let's go into this shade here, so the shade Oasis Glow, and see how that translates on the cheeks. So this shade seems to have like a little bit of shimmer to it. I don't know whether you can see. There's a little bit of shimmer running through this powder, which could be the problem and why some of you are not enjoying this. I do really like the color of this. It is a beautiful like nudie, brownie, slightly peachy shade. I'm not too crazy about the shimmer in here. I would much rather have had like a fully matte blush in this shade, because I'm not super crazy about especially like face products with shimmer in them. But I don't know, you guys, I'm looking at the mirror here also like up close in the mirror of the palette itself, and I am not really having issues with the texture of this blush, other than the fact that because it has the shimmer in it, it can look a little bit overly shimmery and glowy on the cheeks. So I do agree with you that it is not ideal that this blush has so much shimmer particles in it. I don't know whether it will be possible to like mix it in with something to make it appear less shimmery, but I can see why it would not work if you have somewhat more textured skin, because that shimmer is really going to accentuate a lot of that texture. Also, this is my bad cheek. If I look on my like good cheek, I actually feel like it looks pretty nice. I would say not ideal, but also not bad. Definitely not a powder that I would consider unusable on my skin, but I can absolutely see how that shimmer is going to bother a lot of you. Now for highlighter, I'm actually going to mix the finishing powder and the highlight shade. So that's the Strobe Light No, it's technically a highlighter. Yeah, it's a strobe light. It's the rose gold strobe light, so this one here. I think I could probably pull it off, but I think I'm going to lighten slightly the tone by correcting with the finishing powder. So I'm just going to dip a little bit back and forth between the two and apply this as my highlighter. Okay, I think this tone works for me. I don't actually think I need to pick up much more product because I already loaded quite a bit on my brush. And I'm just going to work it into the skin. Oh, okay, I think the highlighter works really well like this. I think maybe if I have a bit more of a tan in the summer, this would work on its own, but like if I mix the two now in the winter, it, you know, creates this like beautiful, like slightly champagne rose gold tone, and I'm quite enjoying it. I'm going to put a little bit of Fix Plus, and then I will zoom you out for the final look for like these three colors. Okay, so here is a little bit of a wider shot. Let me show you also my good cheek. So I'm very happy with the tone of the bronzer. I don't particularly mind the shade Oasis Glow. I am a bit surprised to find out that there is like an actual shimmer running through it. I don't think that's something I realized when I was swatching it yesterday. But, or is it maybe like an overspray? Now I'm not actually sure, because I feel like if I look at the sides of the pan, I see a little bit more of that shimmer. I'm starting to feel like maybe it's a little bit of an overspray actually. You know what? I will just scrape the whole pan so that I remove, because I'm not entirely sure that the actual blush is shimmery. Maybe it's just an overspray. Oh no, it's shimmery. No, I put away all the like top layer, and I can still see like golden shimmer particles in here, I think. Okay, well, I personally I'm not too bothered by this shade, but I can see why some of you would be. I totally understand. That's really unfortunate. It would have been much better if this was just like a matte powder. Okay, so today we're actually going to be testing two products. First, of course, I'm going to go back into the Evil Eye palette and we're going to test these two blushes here. And of course, again, the bronzer and the highlighter. And I will report back on how they wore and how I enjoyed them yesterday. And besides that, we're quickly going to do a look and we're going to talk about the Pop Shot from Charlotte Tilbury in the shade Cosmic Rocks. I have controversial opinions on both. Now, the first controversial opinion I have is that these two blushes here, despite looking like different colors, like this one is more of like a rosy berry color and this one looks like a straight up coral. I think on the cheeks applied with a light hand are not going to look all that different from each other. So that's my controversial opinion number one. I wanted to also report back on this shade here, the Oasis Glow. Yeah, Oasis Glow, the one that you guys have been having issues with, or some of you have been having issues with. I didn't really notice this looking strange on my skin or emphasizing texture or looking unflattering. But it did occur to me that what you could do, especially if you're finding this shade a little bit too light and finding that instead of getting some base color with a bit of the shimmer, you're getting only the shimmer, maybe you can mix it with the bronzer shade actually, because I think that will create a bit more like a matte, more substantial matte base, and then the shimmer is not going to accentuate your skin texture as much. Something definitely worth trying. Either way, we're going to try it at some point. Now I'm going to go back into the bronzer. I did really enjoy wearing the bronzer yesterday. I still think it's a really pretty color, so I have no complaints when it comes to the bronzer shade. The blush and the highlighter were really beautifully. They did not fade, they did not you know, disappear off of my skin, and I wore my makeup, you know, for the usual amount of time, something in the ballpark of like 14 hours. So I feel like these powders, as expected, performed really well on the skin. Kind of already knew that because I've had the bronzer for several years. I think I particularly enjoy the highlighter. Let's get to my experiment here. I'm going to take the Sonia G Classic Cheek brush, I want to say, and I'm going to go with a very light hand first into this marble shade here, which has the like rosy and the berry like veins in it, and I'm going to apply this on my left cheek. And I'm going to go in small increments because both of these shades are quite vibrant. The nice thing about a baked powder like this is that they're very pliable. You can really shear them out quite a bit, or you can build them up, which is why, you know, a color story like this can still work even if you have somewhat, you know, lighter skin tone like I do. Okay, so this is the shade, what is this one called? This is the shade Pink Fusion. It's a very, very pretty shade. I'm detecting a little bit of shimmer in here as well, but it's just creating this beautiful, oh, I forgot to zoom you in a bit. It creates a really beautiful like glow effect on the skin. So obviously it's not going to be for everyone, but I'm enjoying it. And the undertone is like this berry pink shade, very, very pretty. Now I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to take this shade here now, the Coral, and I'm going to apply it on this cheek. With a very light hand. This shade here, from what I can tell, is a matte finish. There is no shimmer in it. So the strobe light obviously has pearl running through it because it's a highlighting powder. This one here has shimmer, and this one here also has shimmer. The ambient lighting is a matte, and these two, the bronzer and this blush, I think are both in a matte finish. We could split hairs and say that there is a difference in the tone. Yes, this one is a little bit more coral, so the shade Vibrant Coral is a little bit more coral, and it has a matte finish, and I can see that there is a matte finish to this blush. This has slightly more berry undertones to it, and because of the shimmer finish you can see it's quite much glowier on the cheek. So yes, in theory they're not the same blush, but if I apply them on my skin tone with a very light hand, I don't really see that much of a difference, if I'm being completely honest. And that's really what has always been my issue with these palettes, that you're getting 6 powders, but in reality you're only working with like 3 or 4. And yes, I am going to use all the powders in here, and I am going to use these two like separately from each other or maybe mixed in together, but I will never consider them different enough shades to pull out, you know, specifically to use this shade or specifically to use this shade. They're sort of going to be interchangeable for me. And I'm not saying they're identical colors, they're not, but I think if you apply them with a light hand on your cheeks, you're not really going to see that much of a difference. I'm sorry, that's my controversial take on this palette. That even though I'm happy to say that I can use all the 6 powders in here, none of this is going to really go to waste, because that's always the danger when you get a palette like this, that 1 or 2 of these powders really are not going to work for you. No, I can make all the 6 powders work beautifully, but again, these two blushes, they're just not that different from each other, in my humble opinion. Okay, I'm going to repeat what I did yesterday for my highlighter. I'm just going to mix the strobe light with a little bit of the ambient light to lighten the tone so that it suits my skin a bit better. Okay, and we have, again, bronzer, highlighter, and blush shade in Pink Fusion. And on this side, we've got bronzer, highlighter, and Vibrant Coral. I'm very curious, can you see a significant difference in the tones of the two blushes specifically? Because I can't. If I go to work later, I'm not going to get a comment of, Mariam, why are you wearing 2 different blushes? I don't think so. Anyway, let's talk about the Charlotte Tilbury Hypnotizing Pop Shot. I opened this, and the second I saw it, my heart sank to my feet and I was so disappointed. First of all, the packaging on these is not my favorite. It is a little bit cheapy and not very like hefty feeling in the hand. It's not cheap plastic, but it's also not like mega luxurious plastic. It is cute, but I don't know that I feel particularly attached to it. But then I opened the eyeshadow, and I hope that I can turn this in the correct lighting so that you can see, but I can see it here when I'm looking straight into the eyeshadow, when the light hits it in a certain way, and I'm going to try to like put the eyeshadow at a certain angle so that you can see that the base tone of this shade is not purple, it's magenta. I did not want magenta. I'm tired of the magenta. I don't want magenta purple. I want a freaking cooler tone. I want this purple. I want this kind of purple. Why is it so hard to make an eyeshadow like this that has a purple undertone like this and the overlay? Because I like the overlay. I think the overlay of like the blue sparkle that leans a bit more on like the turquoise green side, I love that. The other thing is this a nice formula? It's a very nice formula. It feels very smooth, but I was kind of hoping for this to be a somewhat like flakier, chunkier, sparklier formula, and it's more of like a straight up metallic, if that makes sense. Now see, when the light hits it in a certain way, it does look like a cooler toned purple, but I can almost promise you that if I put it on my lids, and the way I'm looking at it like right now, that I'm not really sure that you will be able to see. The way I'm looking at it like straight on right now, it's looking like a magenta purple, and it is exactly what I did not want. I did not want a magenta purple. I'm tired of magenta purples. I have like a million magenta purples from Pat McGrath Labs. So this is a swatch for Cosmic Rocks. As you can see, it is sparkly, but I wouldn't say it's like overly sparkly. It's a very nice texture, but it's really nothing all that special. It's just a metallic eyeshadow, you guys. It's just a smooth metallic eyeshadow. I wanted to compare it to a couple of blues that I have from Pat, because my first thought was like, but I already have an eyeshadow like this. So the first eyeshadow I want to compare to, and I arguably maybe like the formula and the finish of that eyeshadow actually a little bit better, is the shade Hypnotique from the Interstellar Icon Quad. So this one over here. This has a little bit more of like that flakier texture to it, which allows for this shadow to be applied either as a very like opaque layer of color on your lid, or as a bit more of like a topper moment, because you can see even from like swatching it, it has translucency to it. You see that? It has translucency. And I think the only difference in favor of the Cosmic Rocks shadow that I can see is that the duochrome on Pat's eyeshadow leans a bit more on like the blue side, like the blue purple side, whereas there is more like of that greenish turquoise sparkle here, which is what I really wanted. I really wanted a purple like this with like a green, like a very strong green shift on the sparkle. This is one of the 6 pans from 2018, and this is the eyeshadow in question, where I feel like the finish is much more similar to Cosmic Rocks. So it's like a smoother, more opaque metallic finish. But again, the sparkle leans much more on like the blue purple side, whereas this is more on like the green blue side. So again, the only thing that's working for this eyeshadow right now is that the sparkle is the right tone, the one that I wanted. And finally, I think some of you might be curious about it, although I know that they're not going to be at all similar, is the blue that we got with the new Mega Palette. So this one right here. Let's watch that. I think that one, in terms of like that magenta-y purple tone, is quite similar, but I think again the sparkle is going to be more on the blue side than it is going to be on the green side. So there you have it. This is the shade from the new Mega Palette in the Queen formula. Again, the sparkle is much more leaning towards the blue side, although I have to say these two are probably the most similar to each other. If it weren't for the slightly more turquoise green shift, these two would be almost identical. So there you have it. I'm just so disappointed in that magenta purple undertone of the shade, and I'm so, you know, afraid that when I put it on my lid, that is going to be the primary color that you're going to see, the magenta, which is exactly what I didn't want. But you know what? Instead of judging this eyeshadow too harshly, I should probably just put it on my lids and see what actually happens when I, you know, apply it as a lid shade, because the idea is that I'm just going to have, excuse me, I was looking for a brush. I'm just going to do like a one and done moment with this eyeshadow. I'm going to just put it all over my lid, and I will decide once I apply it on my lids whether I want glitter glue, because I'm a little afraid that if I put glitter glue with this shade, I'm not going to intensify the sparkle, I'm going to intensify that magenta purple base, which is what I don't want. I think I said that about 50 times, so it's clear for everyone that I'm just slightly disappointed in the undertone of this shade. But okay, let me take the jumbo base from Sonia G And I'm just going to take the eyeshadow on this brush and I'm going to blend it out on my lids and upwards in the crease. And I'm not really seeing any fallout at all. So I'm just going to start with like layers, okay? I'm going to apply one layer on each eye and then I'm going to build as I see fit. And right now, because I don't think there is like chunky glitter in this eyeshadow, it's just such a smooth texture. I don't know that an eyeshadow like this absolutely needs a glitter glue. I think you can really play around with what you get out of this eyeshadow depending on whether or not you put a glitter glue on. So I'm going to work in layers here to apply it without glitter glue, and then we will decide whether we put a glitter base, yes or no, later on. Okay, I'm going to take the jumbo base from Sonia again and I'm going to put another layer and again blend it out, obviously starting on the lid area and then bringing it upwards towards the crease. Now I have no idea what is coming across on camera, but here on my lids I can see like flashes of that magenta purple and a little bit of that blue turquoise sparkle. To be honest with you, my first thought when I saw this eyeshadow was I'm just not even going to like actually put it on my lids. I'm immediately going to leave it alone and gift it to a friend. But then I thought it's unfair to judge the eyeshadow before putting it out and wearing it for a day. So I do think that I'm going to decide what I do with this eyeshadow when I come home this evening. I'm going to apply a little bit on a little pencil brush to just run on my lower lashes. I think that maybe I'm getting actually what I wanted. I'm going to take a little bit on my finger and I'm just going to apply some here on the lid with my finger, just to see if I layer this eyeshadow what I will get from it. I mean, I do still see flashes of the magenta, don't get me wrong, but I also see flashes of the purple that I wanted and the turquoise green that I wanted, so perhaps it's not all bad. Now on my inner corners I'm going to apply a little bit of this creamy white Kiko eyeshadow stick, and I am going to go in with my Bobbi Brown shade, which ironically is also called Cosmic. This is the beautiful like cooler toned mint green from last year's holiday collection. This is in the Baked Gelée formula, and I'm going to apply that here in the inner corner because a cool toned purple with a minty green is possibly one of my favorite things ever in makeup. Okay, so here is a wide shot of the full look, you know, Hourglass palette, Pop Shot in Cosmic Rocks. Let me give you some preliminary final thoughts, because it will only be, you know, preliminary thoughts. I've only ever used these products like once or twice. Let's talk about the Cosmic Rocks Pop Shot from Charlotte Tilbury first. So let's start with the good news. I don't hate the eyeshadow as much as I thought I would when I first opened it. When I first opened it, I felt such deep disappointment that I was just ready to like declutter the eyeshadow immediately. Now that it's on my lids, I don't hate it, and I think that there are a lot of good things to be said about this eyeshadow. It's a very smooth, very easy to work with formula. You can see that it has a beautiful like wet look on the lids. There's no fallout, really, there's very little fallout, so it's a relatively user-friendly formula for being something that is like quite deep in tone and quite sparkly. There is a little bit of that cooler purple that I want. There is definitely, I love the overlay, I love the sparkle of this shade because it leans more on the green side. But that damn magenta is still there, and I can see it in certain lighting. I can see that it's magenta, and that will never stop annoying me. Why can't we just make a purple like this? Anyway, I think I've complained about this long enough now. Probably I've made your ears bleed. Now let's quickly talk about the Hourglass palette. I'm actually quite happy with the Hourglass palette. I'm not going to be able to say much more about it than I am very, very glad that I can use all the 6 colors in here, because I feel like it is a bit of a Russian roulette when you get these. Like, they seem like they might be colors that you can wear, like all 6 of them, and then you put them on your cheeks, and for some reason they don't all work. I do not need more than 1 ambient lighting in these palettes, definitely. I don't know that I need more than 1 bronzer too. I'm very happy to have the highlighter. And because there are 3 blushes here and they seemed like such different tones, I thought this palette, just on paper, seems perfect. And perhaps the problem is that this palette is not really meant for my skin tone. I have a light skin tone and there's another palette that is meant for lighter skin tones. This is more aimed at people of a medium to slightly deeper skin tone. So what I think is going on is, if you have a deeper skin tone, the difference in the tone of these 2 blushes is probably going to come across a little bit more. I think you're going to see more of the berry tone on the pink fusion side, and you're going to see more of that coral, you know, from the vibrant coral shade. It's just that because I have a light skin tone and I have to apply both of these with a very light hand, and they both have a warm pink undertone, on my skin they just look pretty dang similar. But you know, that's partly my fault, because I chose this color story because the lighter one I think had 2 ambient lighting powders, and it just did not have the right amount of ratios in terms of the types of finishes and products that were in there, and it just didn't really speak to me. This was the only palette that kind of spoke to me, and there was one from the previous years that had like these beautiful like orangey pumpkiny tones that really spoke to me as well. But again, there were 2 blushes in there that looked very similar, so I continue to think that you're always in the danger of buying this for 6 powders and actually getting use out of 3, 4, maybe tops 5. I am very pleased with the packaging. I think the packaging feels much more substantial and hefty in the hand than it looks, you know, on screen. Like, when I've seen people review this, I could not have gotten the impression that this is so hefty and luxurious feeling as it is. It is a really beautifully made outer packaging. So overall, I'm happy with the Hourglass palette. I think I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. I think I'm going to travel a lot with it. So overall, very positive first impression. Tentative positive first impression on the Cosmic Rocks eyeshadow from Charlotte Tilbury. But now that it's on my lids and I'm looking at it in the mirror, I don't hate it, which is good news. Let me know what you thought about all the products. What did you think about the eyeshadow? What do you think about the Hourglass palette? Let's chat. As usual, thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!